Reading for 30 minutes so I could be a better speaker. Today we're reading The Mountain Is You by Brianna Wiest. I still don't know how to say her last name. Wiest, Brianna Wiest, January 25. We are in chapter 4. The title is You Don't Change in Breakthroughs, You Change in Micro Shifts. If you're stuck in life, it's probably because you're waiting for the big bang, the breakthrough moment in which all your fears dissolve and you're overcome with clarity. The work that needs to happen happens effortlessly. Your personal transformation rips you from complacency and you wake up to an entirely new existence. The moment will never come. Breakthroughs do not happen spontaneously, they are tipping points. Revelations occur when ideas that were sitting in the margins of your mind finally get enough attention to dominate your thoughts. These are the clicking moments, the moments when you finally understand advice you've heard your entire life, the moments when you've habituated yourself to a pattern of behavior for long enough that it becomes instinctive. A mind blowing singular breakthrough is not what changes your life, a micro shift is. Breakthroughs are what happens after hours, days, and years of the same mundane, monotonous work. But a mind blowing singular breakthrough is not what changes your life. A microshift is. As writer and media strategist Ryan Holiday has noted, epiphanies are not life altering. It's not radical moments of action that give us long lasting, permeating change. It's the restructuring of our habits. The idea is what science philosopher Thomas Kuhn dubbed a paradigm shift. Kant suggested we don't change our lives in flashes of brilliance, but through a slow process in which assumptions unravel and require new explanations. It's in these periods of flux in that microshift happens and breakthrough level change begins to take shape. Think of microshifts as tiny increments of change in your day-to-day life. A microshift is changing what you eat for one part of one meal just one time. Then it's doing that a second time and a third. Before you even realize what's happening, you've adopted a pattern of behavior. When you do every sorry, What you do every single day accounts for the quality of your life and the degree of your success. It's not whether you feel like putting in the work, but whether or not you do it regardless. This is because the outcomes of life are not governed by passion, they are governed by principle. You may not think what you did this morning was important, but it was. You may not think that the little things add up, but they do. Consider the age-old brain teaser. Would you rather have $1 million in hand today or a penny that doubles in value every day for the next month? The $1 million right now sounds great, but after a 30-day month, that one penny would be over $10 million. Making big sweeping changes is not difficult because we are flawed in because Making big sweeping changes is not difficult because we are flawed, incompetent beings. It's difficult because we are not meant to live outside our comfort zones. If you want to change your life, you need to make tiny, nearly detectable decisions every hour of every day until those choices are habituated. Then you'll just continue to do them. If you want to spend less time on your phone, deny yourself the chance to check it one time to delay. No, deny yourself the chance to check it one time today. If you want to eat healthier, drink half a cup of water today. If you want to sleep more, go to bed 10 minutes earlier tonight than you did last night. If you want to exercise more, do it now for just 10 minutes. If you want to read one page. If you want to meditate, do so for 30 seconds. Then keep doing those things. Do them every single day. You'll get used to not checking your phone, you'll want more water, you'll drink more water, you'll run for 10 minutes, and you won't feel like you have to stop, so you won't. You'll read one page, grow interested, and read another. At our most instinctive psychological level, change translates to something dangerous and potentially life threatening. No wonder why we build our own cages and stay in them, even though there is no lock on the door. Trying to shock yourself into a new life isn't going to work, and that's why it hasn't started. You don't need to wait until you feel like changing to start changing. All you need is to make one micro shift at a time and then let the energy and momentum build. Your mind is anti fragile. Is your brain the greatest antagonist in your life? Is irrational fear at the core of the majority of your greatest stressors? Do you ever have the hunch that you're almost seeking out problems, creating issues where they don't exist, overreacting, overthinking, catastrophizing? If you said yes to these things, congratulations, you're self-aware. You're also just like anybody else. If you feel like you're always subconsciously scanning your life trying to identify the next thing to worry about, the next potential threat to fear, you'd be right. The next potential threat to fear, you'd be right. What we fear most is our minds identify as the least likely threat that we cannot control. If the threat is highly likely, we don't fear it. We respond to it. That's why most worry comes from not just identifying the one thing we cannot control, but the one small unlikely thing we can what the one small unlikely thing we cannot control. Cannot control. Let me read that part again. That's why most worry comes from not just identifying the one thing we cannot control, but the one small unlikely thing we cannot control. So why do our minds need this though? Can't we just enjoy what we have and be grateful? To a point, absolutely. But our minds also need adversity, and that's why it's instinctual to keep creating problems even if there aren't any real ones in front of us. The human mind is something called anti-fragile, which means that it actually gets better with adversity. Like a rock that becomes a diamond under pressure, or an immune system that strengthens after repeated exposure to germs, the mind requires stimulation in the form of a challenge. If you deny and reject any kind of real challenge in your life, your brain will compensate by creating a problem to overcome. Except this time, there won't be any reward at the end. It will just be you battling you for the rest of your life. The cultural obsession with chasing happiness, shielding oneself from anything triggering, and the idea that life is primarily good and any challenge we face is a mistake of fate are what actually weaken us mentally. Shielding the mind from any adversity makes us more vulnerable to anxiety, panic, and chaos. Those who cannot help but create problems in their minds often do so because they have seized creative control of their existence. They move into the passenger seat thinking that life happens to them rather than being the product of their own actions. Who wouldn't be afraid if that were the case? But what most people don't tell you is that adversity makes you creative. It activates a part of you that is often latent. It makes things interesting. Part of the human narrative is wanting something to overcome. The trick is keeping it in balance, choosing to exit your comfort zone and endure pain for a worthy cause. Focusing on problems that are real problems in the world, like hunger or politics or whatever else. But most importantly, it's about staying engaged with what we can control in life, which is most things if you really think about it. Anti fragile things need tension, resistance, adversity, and pain to break and transform. To break and transform. We get this by deeply communing with life and being part of it rather than fearing our emotions and sitting on the sidelines. You can't stay there forever, nor do you really want to. Embracing the grit of it all was what you were made for. Lean in and start living. This is also similar to like Atomic Habits when they talked about how micro shifts and little habits, little compounding habits can actually change you. You don't change overnight, but rather it's something that you build up over time. And this is more like an echo of what Atomic Habits was explaining. The next one is new change creates adjustment shock. Of all the things that nobody tells you about life, that you might not experience instantaneous happiness after positive life change is perhaps the most confusing. The truth about your psyche is this. Anything that is new, even if it is good, will feel uncomfortable until it is also familiar. Our brain works the opposite way. Our brain works the opposite way too in that no, hold on. Our brain works the opposite way too, in that whatever is familiar is what we perceive to be good and comfortable, even if those behaviors, habits, or relationships are actually toxic or destructive. Positive life events can actually trigger depressive episodes. This happens for a few reasons. First, a spike and then decline in mood or attitude can exacerbate stress. Second, the expectation that a positive event will eliminate all stress and bring unprecedented happiness is a destructive one, because the event rarely does that. This is why weddings, childbirth, or a new job can be so incredibly stressful. On top of being a massive life change, there's also the silent assumption that this should be a wholly positive thing, and anxiety and tension should be eliminated. It is jarring to discover this isn't the case. Overall, it comes down to the simple fact that any accomplishments, achievements, or life changes, no matter how positive, elicit change. Change elicits stress. This is particularly true for those who are already predisposed to anxiety and depression, because the concept of one's comfort zone is absolutely essential to stabilizing their mood. This is also why those people can often seem overwhelmingly particular or narrow-minded. So, what are the signs of an adjustment shock? Adjustment shock can manifest as simply an increase in anxiety or irritability. I happen to have that um, more often than I admit. However, it is often more complex than that. Adjustment shock often comes across as hypervigilance. If you make financial gains, your mind immediately shifts to what could potentially derail your progress. A big bill that could come up, or the loss of the job you just got. If you have a new happy relationship, you could become paranoid about infidelity or lies. Adjustment shock can bring to light unconscious attachments and beliefs. If you are someone who was raised to think that wealthy people are morally corrupt, you are going to resist having more money. If you wanted to be famous or to be loved, you're going to resist public success, because famous people are often more criticized and disliked than the average person. Adjustment shock can bring feelings of intense fear. This is because when we attain something we very much care about or have worked toward for a long time, our instinct can be to shield ourselves from the potential loss of it by putting up walls and desensitizing ourselves to the experience. We often resist most deeply the things that we want the most. This is because of an adjustment shock, though we all this is because of adjustment shock, though we don't always know what's causing the resistance. It is scary to receive everything we want, because it forces us to shift out of a survivalist, fear-based mindset and into a more stabilized one. If we are all accustomed to is doing what we need to do to survive, we are then confronted with the next phases of our self actualization. If we are no longer worried about basic survival, our minds are free to turn to the bigger questions in life. What is our purpose? Have we lived meaningfully? Are we who we want to be? We often think of big achievements as a get out of life easier card. They are rarely that. They rarely are that. In fact, the opposite tends to happen. They level us up, forces us into greater responsibilities, to think more deeply about big issues, to question ourselves and what we previously knew to be true. Big achievements actually pressure us to become increasingly better versions of ourselves. This is a net positive for our lives, but can be just as uncomfortable as struggling was, if not more so. I find that every time you want something in life and we tell ourselves that we're going to attain it, we kind of lack the idea of being grateful for what we have at the moment, because once you have that, you're always looking for the next best thing as well. Well, hold on one second, I'll just drink some water. Like, when I was thinking about um, coming here, I thought it's best that I should take university. And the next thing after that was choosing what university to go to. And once I chose that university, I said, "Oh, I should choose a major that's really cool and something I would really enjoy." And then more things add up to that, and more problems, more financial stress, something more things to think about, and it does give me bigger responsibilities and makes me makes me try to um, make better decisions or life decisions uh, in a way that levels me up. There we go. All right. Moving on. How do I overcome adjustment shock? When something positive happens in your life, you are going to have to adjust your mindset about other things to create alignment and a new, more accurate, and sustainable perspective. If you have anxiety about having more money, you will need to learn how to manage it better. If you have anxiety about relationships, you will need to learn to relate to others like you never have before. Your big life change is going to force you to level up in every way imaginable, and the way to overcome the initial fear of stepping into the unknown is to familiarize yourself with it, to make it a part of you, one that you are certain you are prepared for, and that you deserve. Psychic thinking isn't wisdom. When we talk about psychic thinking, we are not referring to the palm reading, neon sign advertised Oculus professionals you can hire to evaluate your energy and predict your future. Psychic thinking is far more insidious than that. Psychic thinking is assuming you know what somebody else is thinking or what they intend to do. It is assuming that the least likely outcome is the most viable outcome because you feel it most strongly. It is believing that you have missed out on another life, a path you did not choose, that you were possibly more meant for. It is believing that the person with whom you have the most electric connection is your most ideal life partner. Of course, the way other people see us is dynamic. Their thoughts, feelings, and intentions are largely, if not entirely, unknown to us. The least likely outcome is just that. It is the least likely outcome. There is no such thing as the path we could have taken, only a projection of our needs and desires onto another fantastical idea of what our lives might be. Electric connection is not soulmateship. Love and compatibility are not the same thing. Psychic thinking detaches us from reality. In place of logic, we put emotions, ones that are most often incorrect, unreliable, and wholly biased toward what we want to believe. Beyond being inconveniencing, psychic thinking is absolutely terrible for your mental health. Psychic thinking breeds anxiety and depression. It's not just something scares or upsets us, it's that we believe that the thought must not only be real, but predictive of future events. Instead of feeling like we are having a down day, psychic thinking makes us assume we are having a terrible life. We heard trust yourself and then began to liken ourselves to oracles. That when a particularly triggering thought or feeling passes through us, it must indicate something more to come. Indeed, psychic thinking as a whole has begun taking on an entirely new light because of the popularity of pop psychology dating back to the 50s and 60s. Trust yourself, the gurus tell you. Deep down, you know the truth. This is valid. Your intestines are literally connected to the stem of your brain. The bacteria in your stomach respond to subconscious intelligent awareness faster than your mind can. This is why your gut is indeed correct on instinct. But when this advice is given to people who cannot differentiate a gut feeling from fear or from a passing thought that has no bearing on reality or their lives as a whole, it becomes a dangerous practice in which they become completely stuck and limited because they assume their random feelings are all real and that they are not, and then not only real, but a prediction for what's to come. Psychic thinking is nothing more than a series of cognitive biases, the most prominent of which are the following. I'll give you a list. 1. Confirmation. 2. Extrapolation. 3. Spotlighting. And that's it, just the 3. So let's talk about each one. Confirmation. At any moment in time, your brain is inundated with stimuli. I don't know that word. I think it's like filled with, or like inundated. Your brain is inundated with stimuli. Probably like maxed out. right? Okay. To help you process, okay, again, at any moment, your brain is inundated with stimuli. To help you process, your conscious mind is aware of about 10% of it or less. Your subconscious mind is still paying attention, locking away information you might one day need. However, what determines what makes it to that 10% of our conscious awareness has a lot to do with what we already believe. Our brains are literally working to filter out information that does not support our pre-existing ideas, and then to draw out our attention to information that does. To draw our attention to draw our to draw our attention to information that does. This means that we are subject to a confirmation bias. He says that again. He said this like last chapter, confirmation bias, which is that we literally seek out and sort through stimuli that supports what we want to think. Number 2, extrapolation. Extrapolation is when we take our current circumstances and then project them out into the future. Ryan Holiday says it best. This moment is not my life, it is a moment in my life. Extrapolation makes us think that we are the sum of our past or current experiences, that whatever stressors or anxieties we are currently experiencing are ones that we will grapple with for the rest of our lives. Unable to see through the problem at hand, we assume it will never resolve itself. Fortunately, this can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. If we are so easily defeated and exhausted by the idea that we will never get over our problems, then we make it more likely that we will hang on to them instead of logically trying to resolve them for a lot more time than is necessary. That does happen to me too. I hang on to a lot of problems, and I never really, um, I never really solve them, and so it just drags on to the rest of my days and my lives, which is not healthy because I just hang on to that grudge, that grief, that pain, and I'm just being formed into that kind of person who carries all of these negative emotions, which I really need to flush out or just to forgive, basically. But like they said, we are not the sum of our past or our current experiences. Yeah. Continuing on. Spotlighting, number 3. Everyone thinks that the world revolves around them. You are thinking about you and your own interests all day, every day. It can be challenging to forget that others are not thinking about us with such intensity. They are thinking about themselves. The spotlight effect is what happens when we imagine that our lives are performative or on display for others to consume. We remember the last 2 or 3 embarrassing things we have done and imagine that others are thinking about them actively as well. Can you recall the last 2 or 3 embarrassing things someone else did? Of course you can, because you aren't paying attention. Spotlighting gives us the false impression that the world is all about us, when it is not. These biases plus others, when combined with psychic thinking, or the idea that our assumptions and feelings about the world will transpose into reality, are harmful and mostly incorrect. Instead of trying to predict what will happen next, our energy is better used when it's focused. Our energy is better used when it's focused intently on the moment, the infinite now. The mystics would say because the truth is that the past and the future are illusions of the present, and all we have is the present. Instead of trying to use your intelligence to hack what's next, try to get better at where you are currently. That's what's really going to change the outcomes of your life. So, looking back at it now, we're at 24 minutes. Or almost. No, we're halfway there. Okay, I'll read as much as I can. The next thing is logical lapses are giving you profound anxiety. Most of the anxiety you experience in life is the result in inefficient critical thinking skills. You might assume that because you are anxious, you are an overthinker. Someone who obsesses about unlikely and scary outcomes more than is more than is reasonable. Let me say that again, my bad. You might assume that because you are anxious, you are an overthinker, someone who obsesses about unlikely and scary outcomes more than is reasonable. The reality is that you are an underthinker. You're missing a part of your reasoning process. Let's start at the beginning. Anxiety is a normal emotion that every person experiences at some point in their lives, typically when circumstances are stressful, tense, or scary. When anxiety is chronic and begins to interfere with day to day functioning, it becomes a clinical disorder. We understand the importance of speaking about mental health with the same degree of legitimacy as physical health. However, in the same way that we'd question what someone keeps tripping over if they repeatedly sprain their ankle, a lot of anxiety is similarly circumstantial, as many illnesses are. Specifically, anxiety tends to be the result of an inability to process acutely stressful and ongoing circumstances. If we want to heal, we have to learn to process. This applies to everyone, not just those with a diagnosis. One of the hallmarks of anxiety is rapid thinking. Because you are focusing on some issue so deeply and for so much time, you assume that you are also thinking through the issue thoroughly and arriving at the most likely conclusion. However, the opposite is happening. You're experiencing a logical lapse. You're jumping to the worst case scenario because you aren't thinking clearly, and then you are engaging your fight or flight response because the worst case scenario makes you feel threatened. This is why you obsess about that one terrifying idea. Your body is responding as though it's an immediate threat, and until you defeat or overcome it, your body will do its job, which is to keep you in defense mode, which is really a heightened sense or a heightened state of awareness to the enemy. Let me just drink one more time. Excuse me. Continuing on. What is a logical lapse? Think of something that you aren't afraid of. Maybe something that other people might find scary. Maybe you aren't afraid of flying in an airplane. Many people are. Maybe you aren't afraid of being single. Many people are. Maybe you aren't afraid of commitment. Many people are. Surely you can think of at least one thing in your life that you are truly unafraid of. Why aren't you afraid of it? Because you don't have a logical lapse there. You can visualize yourself going on an airplane and successfully getting off without freaking out. You can visualize yourself being happy single or happily committed. Even if the worst were to happen, you can think of a situation through its entirety, from exposition to climax to conclusion. You know what you would do. You have a plan. When you experience a logical lapse, the climax becomes the conclusion. You imagine a situation, you figure that you would panic, and then because you're scared, you never think through the rest of the scenario. You never think about how you'd get through it, what you'd do to respond, and how you'd eventually move on with your life afterwards. If you were able to do this, you wouldn't be scared of it, because you wouldn't think it had the power to end you. This is why exposure is the most common treatment for irrational fear. By reintroducing the stressor into your life in a safe way, you are able to reestablish a line of thinking that is healthier and calmer. Basically, you prove to yourself that you will be okay. Excuse me. Even if something scary does happen, which most of the time it does not. Either way, mental strength is not just hoping that nothing ever goes wrong. It is believing that we have the capacity to handle it if it does. Maybe you don't have the self-belief yet. That's okay. It's not something you're born with, it's something you build slowly and over time. It's something you develop by practice, by addressing small problems and then learning healthy coping mechanisms and effective reasoning skills. The thing is that there are millions of scary things that that can happen to us in our lives. Again, I'll repeat that sentence. That was terrible. The thing is that there are millions of scary things that can happen to us in our lives. That is true for everyone. When we are hung up on one scary thing over another, it's not because it's a more imminent or likely threat, it's because we are less convinced we would be able to respond to it. To heal, we don't need to avoid it. We need to develop logic to see situations for what they are and respond appropriately to them. So often in life, our biggest anxiety comes not from what's actually happening, but how we think about what is happening. In that, we reclaim our emotional freedom and power. And that's everything. That's 30 minutes right there. The next time we're gonna talk, or I'm gonna record this video, we'll be talking about the faulty inferences are holding you back from success. We're almost done with this chapter, and look, reading through this, it's something that I kind of experienced already, and I believe I've already had the confidence in myself to overcome these fears that I've had in the past. Although I do have some fears, everybody has some fears, and me myself, I have a lot of fears. I overthink a lot of these things, but now that I'm able to visualize the end of it, I don't have to worry about anything. And yes, at the end of the day, there's really nothing to worry about. I believe it's just the idea that you're only the one in your way. You're the only one standing in your way. So if you take your overthinking, if you take the anxiety, if you take that's fear that's stopping you, nothing's going to block your way towards success. And I can attest to that because I started as an entry-level position at one job, and now I'm already in the admin position or the executive position right now. So nothing, all that happened was that I just went for it because I knew I wanted that position, you know. And the same is going for other aspects in my life, in relationships, and in handling or dealing with people. I may deal with strangers that are fighting or arguing, and I just happen to be in the middle of it. My fear is that I will get involved, but at the end, if you treat them with kindness, if you know how, if because of because of my experience, and you know how to handle those situations, it does not. I'm not afraid of it. I'm okay to be in between those people, arbitrary or being the arbiter between them and dealing with the conflict. So overall, it was a great read today. I am going to the gym. I will finish the rest of my day. I'm happy that I'm able to read this chapter today, and building this kind of habit really helps me improve my confidence and to get my noggin thinking, I guess. Anyway, thank you so much. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye.